Muito bom dia a todos de novo.
Good morning again, everybody. We're starting 15 minutes behind, but I would like us now to start our debate in this part session. And we're now on item 6, which is the urgency debate without a resolution, as you know, on the subject of threats to stability, security and democracy in Western Africa and the Sahel. Now we're going to debate this subject. The security situation in Western Africa and Sahel has considerably deteriorated over the last years and is now a source of major concern for all of us. And that's why the Bureau decided to put this urgency on the agenda. The presence of terrorist groups, attacks against civilians, has led to many people being displaced. They require humanitarian assistance and development aid. Even before the escalation of the violence, the region was already facing various challenges: poverty, food security, inefficient social services, and the consequences of climate change. In spite of various international missions and the efforts of the Sahel countries, the security situation remains unstable, with the constant expansion of terrorist groups throughout the whole of the region. And to exacerbate the situation more, there were various coups d'etat in the region over the last years, which undermined its security even more. In this assembly, it's our mission to clearly reaffirm our respect for national constitutions and for democratic principles, and that it's fundamental that we have these to guarantee peace and stability. Today's debate will be centred on the combined threats to stability, security and democracy which Western Africa and the Sahel region are facing, and how these can be combated. In order to deal with the complexity of the situation, we have to look at the strategies based on the link between humanitarian aid, development and peace for lasting sustainable development throughout the region. We will also need to combat the profound causes of violent extremism and insecurity. Today's debate will also discuss the role of the different missions, international missions, their mandates, and particularly those of the EU. Now, we're aware of the fact that not all of us have the same view of this situation. And yet, I am confident that we do all have the same objective, the objective of achieving peace, stability, and security. I will now be passing the floor to members who are on the list, the speakers list. And I will start by passing the floor to Mr. Domba from the Cameroons for 3 minutes and 30 seconds. You have the floor, sir. Go ahead, please.
Merci, honorable co-président.
Thank you, co-chair. Ladies and gentlemen, the threat to stability and security in the Western Sahara is unfortunately moving across to the countries of Western Africa and may not be limited to those countries only. Cameroon feels impacted. In the Gulf of Guinea, illegal fishing and pollution are putting our countries in danger. In Cameroon and Chad, we observe an increase in armed groups' terrorist acts being done under the eyes of the international community, but how can we understand the attitude of European countries who say that they are our friends, that give accommodation to those who commit terrorist attacks, attack hospitals, kill innocent women and children in complete impunity, whereas the foundation of our partnership is justice. The lack of initiative on the part of our European partners means that there is an increase in suspicion and recourse being had to emergency measures against terrorism. Ignoring this is jeopardizing peace in Chad and Cameroon, which are important pillars in constructing peace in Western Africa. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the proposal of the Cameroon delegation, which reflects the situation in the Western Sahara and Western Africa.
Thank you very much, and I'd now like to pass the floor to a member of the European Parliament, to Mr. Michael Gala. 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, co-presidents. I listened to what our colleague from Cameroon just said, and he is right in the description of the situation. And what you described for Cameroon and Chad is valid from Mauritania, Niger, Mali, Niger, Burkina, and neighboring countries, because this phenomenon of terrorism and of destabilization is a phenomenon that is active in the entire region. And we would have, from the European side, been very much prepared not only to talk about that, but also to formulate some language, because there is a reality on the ground. If I look to Mali, there was an invitation many years ago from the Mali government, both to France and to the European Union, and we arrived and tried to be helpful. I recall many years ago, because I know my friend Asarit Mbakawane since probably almost 20 years, he was one of the first who informed us many years ago of instability in the north of his country and asking us to do something. I recall that. But I also recall the unfortunate situation later when he was president of his own parliament and present in Brussels when one of the many coups occurred in Bamako. And I recall, dear colleague, how insecure you felt. What shall you do now? What shall you do now? Sorry for that. What shall you do in this? my mind is to be very clear. Either we stand on the side of democracy and of elected parliaments, or we are on the side of the putschists. There is no way in between. You cannot be half pregnant, you cannot be in between those basic principles. Either you support the result of an election that has taken place, or you take the sides of the putschists. But we as a European Union should support all those who are on the side who defend the rule of law and the democratic legitimacy in any country, and not make any false compromises. And we should make a difference also in the support. It must be different when there is a coup and a country leaves the path of its own legality, and over there is not a coup, where a government is struggling to survive and keep the legitimacy in the country. And so far, we must make indeed a difference. And I'm not ready to just look away when we are in a situation like we see it in Mali and Burkina, and we cannot simply do business as usual. We can reduce, we have to then to focus on humanitarian aid, which profits the people directly, but not support governmental structures or putschist structures that are having their own agenda and not the agenda that an elected government was there for. And I would have liked in a joint resolution to fix such principles that are not in our favor, but I think in the favor of the countries concerned, of the people concerned, and I would call on all to side with the right side. And we have seen initiatives both from the African Union and from ECOWAS who were denouncing coups, of course. And we should be in a position to enable the African structures to deal with these issues far more than before we would be called to intervene. So as much as I understand the call from the colleague in Cameroon or others that we should come in, that can only be the last resort and not the first one. But as I said, I'm very much prepared to support efforts that come from within Africa to stabilize situations. And in this regard, I think we need to be more creative in order to enable the structures concerned, be it ECOWAS or in other regions, to do their job on behalf of those who are legitimately in charge of their countries and not the ones who are taking over in an illegitimate way. All these things and principles, I think, they could have and should have been enshrined and be formulated in a joint resolution, but there was, at least amongst some on the ACP side, not the will to have it. I call on you to conduct further your internal discussions whether that can be the right way, because in earlier years we have had really conflictual situations. In the Bureau, in the working group that we had, I recall the situation in Sudan 10 years ago or even longer, where we were very much apart at the beginning, but we could find common ground for a joint resolution. That should be our attempt, our effort to see, and then thereby have an influence. If we only discuss, it goes on the left ear, it goes in, and it goes out of the right ear, and it's gone. But if we have something in writing, we can take it home and say, look, this is our common ACP and EU position, and that is what we demand from either the government concerned or the putschists concerned, that they should return to the rule of law, and then we can come in as European Union and perhaps be helpful to return to this situation, but not simply try to get away with anything in writing, because then it's easier for the putschists on the ground to have their agenda done. So that is my position on that, and that of the EPP. I hope it reflects a broader audience here, and I hope that the internal discussions in the ACP on how to handle such crises will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. You understand that I give 10 minutes to Michael Galler. It's a choice of the EPP group. It's like that the times are decided by the ACP side and by the different groups. So now I give the floor to Sangari Yakuba from Côte d'Ivoire. 3 minutes, 3 minutes enough.
Where is it? Excellence.
Excellencies, co-presidents, members of Parliament, members of this Assembly, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is with true pleasure that I am taking the floor today on behalf of the Côte d'Ivoire delegation to share with you the feelings of our country on stability, security and democracy in Western Africa and in the Sahel. Ladies and gentlemen, Côte d'Ivoire has welcomed several million nationals from Western Africa. So naturally, we are concerned by matters pertaining to stability, security and democracy in the Sahel and its region. And that is the reason why the President of the Republic, His Excellency Wansa Ouattara, has given instructions to the Prime Minister, Head of Government, and to all the ministers concerned to accelerate the implementation of the national strategy for the fight against terrorism with a view to preventing incursions on our borders. He also considers that international cooperation should be given privilege in order to gain efficacy in our fight against these barbaric acts that fragilize our democracy. In order to create that synergy in action, our President feels that we should encourage more active participation on the part of our country in the initiatives which apart from Côte d'Ivoire, includes Benin, Burkina Faso, Ghana and Togo. This initiative is, for its member states, a framework for exchange of information and joint military operations against terrorism. The President of the Republic has also insisted on local development and employment of young people as an essential instrument in the fight against violence. Ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that poverty and youth unemployment, apart from being a factor for political instability, is a factor of insecurity in Western African countries. And that is the reason why our country, which is closely attached to peace and stability, calls for all necessary solidarity in order to make violence in all its forms fail. Yes, Western Africa and Sahel need greater investments in education, in job creation, in order to give young people an occupation, because unemployment can lead to all types of adventures, including the most dangerous ones. Before concluding, Co-Chairman, I would like to recall that violent radicalism is a grave threat against the constitution of democratic, prosperous countries. And it's for this reason that our country has accepted to welcome in Jacquesville the International Academy of the Fight Against Terrorism. Finally, President, I would like to thank the local authorities of Strasbourg for the warm welcome that we have received. Long live international cooperation, long live our Parliamentary Assembly.
Colleague.
Long live indeed. Thank you, colleague.
MEP Hans Hyde for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I also want to thank the previous speakers because they expressed how urgent it is to deal with the situation in the region and about the needs for immediate action, that there are needs for immediate action in the region. So I'm very sorry and disappointed that we will not be able to vote on a resolution together and sending out a clear message from this assembly. It could have been a strong resolution showing our common ground. and clearly expressing support for a comprehensive engagement by the European Union. And it could also have been a strong support for local people and the state of democracy in the region, as the situation of the population is very alarming. But I'm very thankful for this exchange and very thankful for the opinions of the ACP members and parliamentarian colleagues. So when we address the threats to stability, security and democracy in Western Africa and in the Sahel, we are confronted with armed conflicts and, as the previous speakers expressed, extremist terrorist attacks. We have migration within the countries and regions and to Europe as well. There are many refugees, and you know about the situation in the Mediterranean. And it's also for the African countries a very bad situation when the young generation leaves these countries. We have suppression of personal freedoms and the rule of law. We have transnational organized crime. We are confronted with environmental degradation consequences of the climate change. There are food insecurities and possible famines. There were military coups and influences such as by the Kremlin-backed Russian Wagner Group, which commits human rights violations. And there are a lot of economic dependencies. The consequences from the war in Ukraine will further aggravate the situation. We will have lack of cereals, lack of cultivation, locked ports, an energy crisis and probable famines within the next half year. We have to be aware about it. So what we have to do is that we to act all we can do and all we have the possibilities to act, to stop the violent confrontations, to act against extreme poverty, the lack of access to basic social services, the accessibility to education. We have to fight food insecurity, climate change, and above all, we have to help the human beings in the region and stop human suffering and despair. And we have to protect the stable democracies and the rule of law. And security in the Sahel has an impact on the security of the European Union's southern neighbors, and stability in Africa has an impact on Europe. So let us act. We have to act for peace, stability and security, and I'm looking forward that we continue our dialogue within the ACP-EU group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, colleague. So now I give the floor to Honorable Musa Hussein Naib from Eritrea. 3 minutes and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Co-President, for giving me the floor. Mr. Co-President, as I have learned today that there will not be a resolution on the topic at hand, I would prefer to make my intervention at pertinent time in the future. Thank you very much. I decline.
Thank you very much, colleague. So I give now the floor to member Jean-Christophe Ochent for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, cher Président, chers collègues de l'APP.
Thank you, President, colleagues. We're in a difficult situation in the region. We're all aware of that. I'm delighted that we have this opportunity to discuss it today, although I would have liked to have had a resolution so that we could find a common position between European countries and ACP countries. But we already have common positions. Last time we voted a joint resolution on respect of constitutions in our countries. Michael Gahler has recalled that we need to respect the constitutions, and that means respecting the democratic choices of peoples. And respecting democratic choices of peoples means supporting those who've been elected democratically. And that's what we are doing as members of the European Parliament. And you'll see that regardless of our political colour in the European Parliament, we have this same approach, that is, support those who've been elected democratically. And that's why each time there is a coup d'etat in a country, we ask the question, what shall we do with this situation? How can we help that country on its path of return to democracy? How can we support that country in that difficult situation? And I can tell you that we don't always know the answer. We don't always know how to help. We need you to tell us what to do sometimes, but we're happy to help. We're prepared to help to support democracies because, as our president said in the beginning, democracy will bring us stability, peace, and security. And all of that is the basis for development in those countries. That is the basis for prosperity. That is the basis for youth employment. And I'm very glad that the representative of Côte d'Ivoire has just mentioned that, because we need that stability. And we, European countries, are prepared to work with you towards that stability and that security. And the only way that can happen is through international institutions. The African Union and COAS have found a strong position that we support as the EU. So I invite you, representatives of ACP countries, to support those countries in their quest for democracy. Michel Gala said, if there's no democracy, if there is a state where there's been a coup d'etat and they're not moving towards democracy, there would be less cooperation. And for me, it's very clear. If the country is no longer on that path of respect of our common values, then we cannot support that country in the same way. But we want to support countries in fighting against terrorism, as different countries are doing, because there is a danger. And the danger is that insecurity expands and moves into different countries, that it moves towards the Gulf of Guinea. And I think we need to avoid that, and we need to support the entire region and all the efforts made by the African Union and COAS to move towards democracy. The EU is prepared to support you along that journey, if you so wish.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Chuffa Dulu from Ethiopia for 3.5 minutes.
It's open. It's open, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ethiopia does recognize the challenges faced by our brothers in Western and Sahelian Africa. And that is why we support the position taken by the African Union and the ECOWAS, who have taken up the matter very seriously and are trying to deal with these challenges in the region. Ethiopia has stated its position on this matter during the political committee meetings, and as a result, we do not wish to take the time of this assembly to reiterate the same positions, and so we don't have any further comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now I give the floor, je donne la parole
to my colleague, Madame Rivasi, for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, colleagues. So we're talking about stability, security and democracy. These are terms, it's true, that go hand in hand, because if you have instability, you don't have democracy. If you have insecurity, be it food insecurity or any other kind, there's no democracy. So these terms really are interlinked. So I'm wondering, why do we have insecurity? Why? And the first thing to note is poverty. It's linked to poverty, the fact that there's no public services, or that there's climate change, and now there's competition for land and water. That leads to destabilization in these countries. And now with the crisis in Ukraine, we have food instability, and colleagues have said this can lead to famine. And what creates instability? Well, it's the feeling of injustice. Colleagues were talking about social justice, the fact that we need to look at tax avoidance. Why do we have people in governments that can purchase magnificent villas? I mean, it's not just in Africa, it's the same in Ukraine and elsewhere, but these are things that cause instability. And I think we really need to go to the core of corruption and environmental crimes. And what really concerns me at the moment is food security. We've always defended bilateral agreements for Europe that haven't given us food sovereignty. If there's a crisis in a certain place, if people don't have food, then obviously there are going to be social movements, and then young people who don't have jobs, what are they going to do? They're going to turn towards people who are going to give them weapons or money. Whether it's jihadists or other movements. This is what destabilizes countries. We need to look at all three of these concepts, so they all go together. And in all the projects funded by the EU, it needs to make sure that it looks at...
Thank you very much for your passion.
Alban Obanji from Gabon, 3 minutes enough.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. We had in fact signed up for the debate with the ACP President rather than the current subject. That's what we actually wanted to be speaking on, not this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I give now the floor to Honorable Salah from Gambia, 3 minutes and a half.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. On the 15th of April 2005, 27 ACP states met in Bamako to sign the charter that established the ACP Parliamentary Assembly. And during that period, the president of the Malian Parliament was Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. And he emphasized the development that had taken place, which, as we examine the history of the ACP and the EU relation, I will read. But where is that president today? That is the issue of stability and security and democracy. The problem of democracy is the absence of the state in most parts of our countries. We will not see schools, hospitals, police, nothing whatsoever, because of underdevelopment. And as long as there is that underdevelopment, there is the danger of instability and insecurity. But to address it is to empower the people. How do we create a sovereign people that will gradually take charge of the destiny of each of our countries is the route towards ending that instability and insecurity. And therefore we must nurture democracy in each African country. power owned by the people, and a conscious people who are not divided into ethno-linguistic groups, into religious groups, into sectionalist groups, but people who develop a sense of nationhood. We have become sovereign republics, but we have not created sovereign people. That's our problem. And that's a challenge we must address. You cannot address that for us. We must interrogate ourselves and chart a path which will make our people to take charge of their destiny. But in doing so, we need the collaboration of people who respect us, who will understand that we have the capacity, but we have challenges, who will take the challenges with us and move forward. ECOWAS has already the instruments that shows that we should not accept unconstitutional takeover power. But they are also moving in a direction where people establish 2 terms and then violate their own constitutions. So in essence, we must begin to develop principles and accept those principles. But in this forum, the danger always is dictation, imposition, rather than allowing us to lead. Others try to think that they are more democratic than us, and they're trying to lead us. So at a point that they do not hear us. We hope that this assembly that you are killing now should have been the institution where we can collaborate and develop common values and inject those values in our own countries. I had said it here. As we pass these motions and resolutions, we take them back to our national parliaments, make them domesticated. This is the trend that we were taking. But you have killed the very parliament that could have facilitated us using our common knowledge to shape the destiny of not only our individual countries, but our collective community. Thank you.
Your support for dialogue and collaboration, you follow trying to find and to follow our meeting with this ADN and with this perspective. So I give now the floor to Honorable Gray from Liberia, 3 minutes and a half.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and co-presiding. We are happy to be in this meeting today, but let me begin by stating emphatically that the Republic of Liberia has been very clear or unequivocal in terms of the condemnation of coups and any form of instability or any form of unconstitutional change. That is not supported, and I see no reason why we cannot take a position, because the leaders of West Africa, for example, had taken the definitive position, an uncompromising definitive position, and that position is very clear. That doesn't support any form of undemocratic change of government. Not only that, but also that for a sitting head of state to dissolve a parliament that makes the law is unbelievable and uncompromising. Also, we are very concerned about the situation in West Africa and other sub-Saharan African countries, because what affects our neighbor affects us directly as a country and as a group of people. Having said that, also, one of the critical points here is that we must also condemn leaders who extend their time unconstitutionally by changing the constitutions of their various countries. The EU, the ACP, should take a definitive position on that, especially changing their constitution and not providing the opportunity for the time stipulated for election. The third point here is that the West must be very clear and extremely strict and defending all moral values, that there should be no invincible hands in encouraging any form of instability or coup d'etat in the sub-Sahara region. There is a critical thing, and there's something we have to look at. So let me state in my closing that I think it will be a contradiction to stand here and don't state the position on behalf of my country. We are lawmakers. We make laws. This parliament make laws. We don't break laws. We are not lawbreakers. We have ratified international protocols. We have also ratified regional protocols that frown on instability and coup. So we must be courageous as ACP members, extremely courageous, and not to mince our voice, to be emphatic and take a definitive position, because today it may be Liberia, for example, it could be another country. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, co-presiding, fellow parliamentarian. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now I give the floor to Mark Botenga for 2 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, President. Let's talk about the Sahel first. Clearly, all of us want peace, stability, security. We need that. But when European leaders want to explain how to create stability in the region, I think often they're in a very bad place to do so. A very bad place, because no European leader should talk about reasons without recalling, regretting and condemning the invasion of Libya and the war in Libya, which destroyed a country and destabilized the region. How ironic. Afterwards, its armies actually provided stability. Let's look at the consequences of those interventions. We're talking about coup d'etat, but in Mali, in Burkina Faso, even the coup d'etat are less contested sometimes than the military presence of some European countries. Some see them even as a return to sovereignty. So really, we have to look at the impact of European countries and their interventions. I understand the Sahel people want to be liberated from their subvention to Europe, economic or military, whatever it may be. If Europe wants a partnership with Africa, we have to hear the cries of the people in this assembly too. Democracy is essential, but it comes with sovereignty and the right to self-determination, clearly. So please, let's bring to an end neocolonialism and the indebtedness that strangles countries, the looting of natural resources, but also of fish in the seas by European vessels. That will be the only way for us to have a partnership between equals where all of us can make progress together. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to pass the floor to the Honourable Songwe from Malawi, 3.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, co-presidents, for granting me the opportunity to contribute on this very important topic. Co-presidents, Malawi believes and strongly saw that peace and stability of nations are major prerequisites for any meaningful and sustainable development. The continued instability due to security threats in Western and Saharan Africa has far much ramifications not only in that region, but also on the entire African continent. Malawi, as a peace-loving nation, would like to see that the region is assisted to maintain peace, stability, and flourishing democracy. In order to achieve this, Malawi proposes that our partners in the EU should inter alia help the region by investing in education, commercial agriculture, meaningful trade agreements that provide a win-win situation for both parties, and the job creation projects and programs which are key for poverty eradication and social exclusion. These are the vices that are forcing young men
to be motivated to engage in violent activities that destabilize our nations. And at the core of all this instability, Mr. President and honorable colleagues, we should not forget the fact that poverty is the root cause. And poverty, to some extent, has been encouraged, has been supported because of the interference, involvement, and because of the instigation by other external forces. Unless and until we address these issues with truthfulness and courage, the issues of threats, security, and insecurity and instability will continue to preoccupy our agenda in this assembly. As I conclude, let us all be mindful of the fact that threats to peace, stability, security, and development are fueled by marginalization of certain societies, which calls upon us all to look into the policies, measures, and programs that are inclusive for all in the development process. I thank you, Mr. Co-Presidents, and I yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now I give the floor to Maria Arena pour 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Well, first of all, I'm delighted that we're having this debate today in this Assembly. I would have preferred to have a debate with resolution, but it's not up to us to point fingers at any country because they didn't support a resolution. We're not here to point fingers at partners. We're here to build together and think together about solutions. It's true that the Sahel region is confronting different challenges. The climate challenge with movement of populations that no longer have access to their land, the governance challenge with peripheral regions not taken into account, the exploitation of resources with a lack of distribution of the yields to populations that are being deprived of their land, deprived of their life, because often those exploitations lead to ecological disasters, meaning they can no longer live on their land. They become poor, and all of that favors organized crime surrounding trafficking of drugs, weapons, human beings, which all falls under this jihadist or religious tendency, which enables that religious justification to bring in those people. Now, lamenting this will not enable us to provide a solution. We need to understand why populations today prefer coup d'etat to democracy. We should ask that question. We should ask ourselves about democracy. Is it democracy? Was it not a false democracy, often supported by Europeans as well? Why do we have this anti-Western feeling in that region today? Let's ask that question, rather than just thinking that there's propaganda, that maybe Russian propaganda, it exists not only there. Political parties in Europe have been financed by Russian propaganda. So, yes, it exists. But is that the only issue in that region? No, there's other things. So let's assess the situation. Let's see what has been done well and what has been done badly in that region, so that we don't continue making the same mistakes. That's the aim with today's debate. Thank you to colleagues for putting this on the agenda. We need to continue to work together. Thank you.
Merci, Marie.
Thank you, Marie. And now I'd like to pass the floor.
Honorable Imbarkaoue from Mali for 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-Président.
Thank you, Co-President. Co-President, I've heard what people have said, and I share what people have said, particularly what Marie has just said and what Mark said. What's happening in the Sahel today? In Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, moving towards Benin, Togo, Côte d'Ivoire. What is it? It's the consequence of what has happened in Libya. I draw the attention of the JPA to this. In 2011, we should have avoided sending NATO to Libya. I said if Gaddafi dies, it will be difficult for Mali, and that's exactly what's happening now. We have called upon France. The Sahel operation arrived. They stopped terrorism from Kona. It was to progress to our lands. The mission was to recover all our land. But when we got there, Serval said to the Mali soldiers, you stay here, you do not progress. So the French military progressed only that far. So they started creating problems in our country. We didn't ask Serval to leave Mali. We didn't ask the Akuba force to leave Mali. But we evaluated the results and those armies, and we understood that terrorism is not reducing. Today, there's no stability in Mali. There's no security in Mali. We are threatened by extraordinary terrorism by two terrorist groups. The ACME group, first of all, attacking Malian forces, attacking the army from the border of Niger to the border of Burkina Faso. We're combating Islamic State, dispersing millions of people, and these people are the worst criminals you can imagine. They kill civilians as if they were flies. 500 civilians were killed in the region. Tuareg civilians, just last week. So, President, we're doing what we can to fight against terrorism with the means at our disposal. We've tried to get armed via the European Union. We've tried to get helicopters from the EU, sophisticated weapons, but the EU has refused to give us those weapons. Why? We had to go towards other partners. We have weapons now, enabling us to fight against terrorism, and we will continue to fight terrorism. In Mali, we will put an end to this terrorism.
Nous allons négocier avec la CEDEAO et nous allons nous mettre d'accord avec la CEDEAO pour aller vers.
We are going to negotiate a calendar for elections.
Thank you very much. All of us want peace, security, stability in your region and throughout the whole of the world. I'd now like to pass the floor to my colleague, Pierrette Hertzberger-Fofana. 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. The speaker needs to move closer to the microphone. Thank you. Thank you, President, Co-President, and members of the Bureau. The threats with poverty, lack of access to social services, climate change and armed groups is leading to instability and insecurity. Over recent months, several Sahel countries have de facto fallen under the control of the military. In this context, it's important to recall that democratic governance, representative governance, depends on the respect of the constitution by the executive and free and fair multipartite elections. Citizens in Western Africa support democracy and democratic process. A global response to the challenges facing the Sahel and Western Africa needs coordination between security, climate and development policies. Climate change has reduced food security, hampering the efforts made towards sustainable development. Furthermore, asymmetrical competition hampers African producers and investments made for the environmental transition. How are we going to attack this insecurity between the Sahel regions and coastal regions, for example, in agriculture and food security? We need to ensure that investments in policies do not diminish stability locally. The Sahel is confronting challenges at the moment that we need to face together. Let's ask ourselves the questions about democracy and instability in these countries. We call upon all EU member states to shoulder responsibility by abstaining from any weapons transfers that may lead to violations of human rights in Western Africa and the Sahel.
Thank you very much. The next speaker.
Honorable Amadou Dioufo from Niger, 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-Président.
Thank you, Co-President. Well, while we're talking here, there are losses and massacres in the Sahel happening as we speak. As a representative of Niger, I can say that we're facing challenges with Nigeria and Cameroon. In the north, we've got the trafficking of human beings, drugs, weapons, all kinds of trafficking. And then in the Sahel and the Burkina side, we have all the challenges that other colleagues have talked about. These are problems we're facing on a daily basis. We have movements of population, mass movements, leaving territories under the threat of the jihadists, problems of education, health, occupation for young people. And if we don't use these young people, they will be taken up, they will be hoovered up by terrorism. There's a problem of governance, development, democracy, but we are a democratic country. I was elected for a mandate of 5 years. We have a transition from one democratically elected president to another. But we have problems. We have challenges. The EU needs to help us to fight terrorism by helping us to have access to material and giving us access to security infrastructure so that we really can make progress in this fight. I would like to call for help in fighting this problem. we're a bloc, but if we disintegrate, there are going to be consequences for other countries. If all these terrorist movements come together, we'll no longer be talking about Europe or Africa or democracy. So help us, please.
Thank you. Next speaker, my colleague from the European Parliament, Eric Andrea, for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-Président.
Thank you, Co-President. I think we need to bear in mind what our African representatives have said. The Mali representative said this with great vehemence. I think we need to be humbled as Europeans. Have we done everything right? The situation shows us that we have not, evidently. Have we implemented actions to serve public interest or the interest of the majority or the minority? I think we can no longer ask that question now. Have we attacked the issues of the young population, poverty, employment? I think it's high time for us to rethink the way in which we intervene, so that instead of this pseudo partnership, we have a true partnership on an equal footing. What's happening in the Sahel, we know, is going to concern people beyond the Sahel, throughout the continent of Africa and the Western continent. We need to think about the future and the attitude we will have. We cannot see this in binary terms. Of course, we're not going to refrain from criticizing a coup d'etat, but we have to ask the question about what our behavior has led to in recent years. We need to be humble and think about a new approach to our collective cooperation, co-development, co-construction, jointly for two continents that go hand in hand.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to pass the floor.
Mohai from South Africa for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Co-President. The Sahel region faces multiple and multifaceted peace and security challenges with devastating consequences for states and their populations. The nexus between development and security is clearly established in this region, where these phenomena are interlinked and interrelated. In this regard, there cannot be peace without development, and there cannot be development without peace. In this context, we stress the need for a holistic approach comprising political, security, and socio-economic development interventions that will lead to lasting peace and stability in the region. We welcome the continued efforts of the African Union Peace and Security Council to work towards the deployment of the African Union Standby Force, which sought to further strengthen the fight against terrorism in the region. South Africa remains concerned by the continued terrorist attacks against civilians, security and defense forces, as well as peacekeepers in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Lake Chad, countries that have resulted in many fatalities. It is disturbing that the terrorist attacks are spreading to other countries in the region previously not affected. We are encouraged by the initiatives undertaken by countries in the region to improve the security situation. The decision taken by ECOWAS Extraordinary Summit on Terrorism in September 2019 is indicative of the determination and political will of African leaders to collectively address security challenges in the region. The continuation of consultation processes and national dialogue to address election-related issues by countries in the region is commendable, and we have got to continue to sustain it in order to preserve peace and stability. Regional organizations are key partners of the United Nations in this important task. South Africa has consistently prioritized and enhanced strategic partnership between UN and regional, sub-regional organizations, not only in countering terrorism, but also in conflict prevention and resolution. As a member of this council, South Africa continues to strive to closer cooperation between United Nations and African Union. This takes into account the volume of African conflict solutions on the agenda of the Security Council, as well as growing threat of terrorism across Africa. South Africa will continue to work with all members of the United Nations and the African Union, Southern African Development Community, and other relevant parties in addressing the scourge of terrorism and its attendant manifestation and regional and international level. It is our view that respect for regional bodies is critical to encourage homegrown solutions. I thank you.
Thank you very much for the statement. And now I give the floor to Honorable Nyambuya from Zimbabwe. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, for giving me the floor. There is a plethora of threats to peace, security, and stability in Africa in general, and the Western and Sahelian region of Africa in particular. These emerging threats in the fold of criminal activities across borders, organized crime such as trafficking of drugs, weapons, human beings, as well as democracy and governance deficits and terrorism have become a major cancer that potentially could overturn the hard-won economic gains, democratization, and regional cooperation, as well as undermine future sustainable development efforts. Chairman, COVID-19 pandemic, religious extremism, climate change, amongst others, also compound the situation. There are increasing issues such as climate change threats to human health, food and water security, and socio-economic development in Africa, and mainly because of our over-reliance on climate-sensitive farming and pastoralism, as well as low adaptive resilience capacities. Accordingly, we urge parliaments throughout Africa to use constitutional mandates to explicitly oversight on governments and to increase ambition through nationally determined contributions and implementation of the Paris Agreement and its subsequent renewed commitments at the Glasgow COP26 in their entirety, and we must prioritize these. We would also like to commend the efforts which have been made by ECOWAS in this particular sub-region, and we would like to commend also the efforts which have been made by the AU Peace and Security Council. Chairman, peace and security in Western and Sahelian Africa is also of Europe's interest. There are historical and economic links, thus the partnership demands collaborations and cooperation between organizations for their mutual benefit and multilaterally. I thank you.
Very much. So I give now the floor to the member of the European Parliament, Janina Osiska, for 2 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Président.
Thank you, President. I do apologise. I can't stand. I'm in a wheelchair. I would like to come back to what was said by Mr. Gala on the resolution. There's one point which I think is vitally important, and Mr. Gala did mention this. I have 30 years of experience with humanitarian aid. I know when people go to organizations or local governments, then when money arrives at that level, it's very well used. And I wanted in the resolution to underline the fact that it's much better to provide humanitarian aid on the ground for local governments and local humanitarian organizations. If you look at Ukraine and Poland, and if the money goes directly to governments, it's unlikely the money will be well used. So please have more trust in local government level in Africa and humanitarian organizations. We have a great deal of experience and we know how to best use any money that arrives at our level. Thank you.
Merci, collègue. Et maintenant...
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Euclides Varela da Silva for 2 minutes.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, President, for giving me the floor. I was on the speaking list, but on challenges to island nations, but thank you for the floor. I think that ACP countries, no matter where we come from, Western Africa or not, all our efforts to guarantee peace and stability in the region will benefit not just Western Africa, but Europe too, and the whole region. It's vital that we cultivate a culture of dialogue and that we maintain democracy. We can't say it's normal to have successive waves of coup d'etat in countries in our sub-region. I think it's time for us to try to ensure dialogue to resolve these conflicts, and the military too needs to understand its role and leave elected politicians and civilians to guide the destiny of our countries. And I think that the support and commitment not just of ECOWAS countries is vital, but also of Europe, if we can achieve our objectives, peace not just in the region, but beyond the region too. Thank you.
Merci. Obrigado.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Kwen Antimadu from Ghana. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Ghana has a strong interest in the stability and security of the African continent, even more so in our neighborhood. There have been attacks and murder of thousands of people in their communities across the Sahel, including in ECOWAS member states, by violent extremists and terrorists. There have also been the displacement of whole communities, either by the activities of these terrorists or violent extremists, or as a result of climate change. A typical example is the shrinking of Lake Chad, which has caused irregular waves of migrations to Ghana and other coastal states. We cannot also discount the flow of small arms and light weapons that accompany those flows of people and terrorists. In addition, we face threats to maritime transportation and installations in the Gulf of Guinea. All these have impacts, large and small, on our ability to develop as a nation, including achieving Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. We cannot realize the benefits of the trade under the African Continental Trade Area if terrorists, violence, insecurity, political upheavals, and coup d'etats disrupt trade and the industrialization agenda that should support increased trade and employment in our countries.
Thank you, colleagues. Sorry you use your time. Thank you very much. So now I give the floor to Honorable Alpha Diallo from Guinea. 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. On behalf of my delegation, on behalf of the President of the Transitional Council of Guinea, I'd like to take the floor to express our concern about the subject we're discussing this morning. The whole question of threats to democracy and to stability in the region is one that is very important. And we welcome the fact that our parliamentary colleagues from Europe have an interest in what is happening in our region, but their interest has to be backed up by facts and the real situation in the region. What do they know about our region? It's very important to actually have the details when we talk about the strength of democracy. When a president changes the constitution to remain in power through force, what is that? Is it democracy? When a president throws the opposition into jail, is that the strength of democracy? I think it's very important, therefore, that we look at the details, and it's very important that the democratic dimension be taken into account. That's what happened in our country, Guinea, before the 5th of September. Since then, under our new leadership, important reforms have been established in setting up a parliament that is going to be working on deep-set reforms for the state, providing the country with a constitution and with bodies for organising free and transparent elections. So I would call on all the parliamentarians present here, all the delegations, and ECOWAS, which is supporting us in developing consensus so that through its transition, Guinea can in fact organise free and transparent elections so that the transition is a success for our country. Thank you. Thank you very much for your words, and I'd now like to pass the floor.
Honorable Dido Hassu from Kenya, from 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Honorable Chair, stability, security, and democracy are oxymoron that one cannot happen without others, and others cannot happen without one. Literally, in the African continent, in every region, there is a conflict that is ongoing, depending on the levels. The question that this gathering must ask, why in Africa? We must learn from history. What is currently happening in Ukraine, that is in global Europe, must be telling in terms of why is this abnormal, and yet these conflicts in Africa are considered to be normal. Chair, there's no normal conflict, because all conflicts have the same effect. They cause refugees, there are killings, destruction of infrastructure, proliferation of arms, destruction of the normal lives of human beings. For that reason, I think, Honorable Chair, the world community must give attention to conflict everywhere on equal footing. Secondly, we must give impetus to conflict early warning so that even these conflicts in Africa must be prevented. If they are not prevented, then they must be quickly resolved. Finally, it is on the issue of good governance and democracy. If we have one type of democracy in Africa and a different type of democracy in Europe or the rest of the developed world, then we'll not be able to address the issues of conflict in this region. Finally, Honorable Chair, it is important to build capacities for the regional economic communities or commissions, whether it is in East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, so that at least this conflict could be managed, if not stopped, as soon as it will be humanly possible. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Antes de dar...
Before I pass the floor to the representative from the European Commission, Mr. Domenico Rossa, if I may, because I was called on directly by Mr. Dito Rasu. So let me say the following very briefly. Colleagues, were we to decide together that we wanted to express our unhappiness with a violation of international law, then quite clearly, at the same time, we would be showing our unhappiness with all violations of international law, for those that are taking place now and those that took place in the past. On the contrary, were we to maintain our silence, then we would actually be ratifying them all. Having said that, I would now like to pass the floor for 5 minutes to the representative of the European Commission, Mr. Domenico Rossa. Go ahead, sir, please.
Thank you very much for the floor. First of all, let me share some, I would say, frustration as expressed by some of the honourable members about the fact that this debate will not end with a resolution that would have been, I would say, timely and appropriate considering the situation in the region. As the picture in the region is overall extremely worrisome, if I may say. The Sahel, and many of you highlighted the different challenges that the region is facing, and these are challenges of security, political, social, and economic natures that are interlinked among them, but that also refers to the fact that there is still in the region a very weak governance and a culture of the impunity, if I may say. The situation, you know, as it is, there are 3 that out of the 5 countries of G5 Sahel that face the coup and are going now through a transition process that is very different, but clearly this shows that there is a governance crisis in the region that has spillovers on the other country of the region. There are also developments that are mentioned by some of you, such as the human rights violation on the civil population that are dramatically increasing. Then we have a perspective that more than 33 million of people will be food insecure in the future. And I would just make a connection between what is happening in Europe and what is going to happen in Africa. We have to consider that 25% of the cereal trade in the world is originating from Russia and Ukraine, and nearly 30% of the wheat consumption in Africa is coming from Ukraine and Russia. So you can expect that this, of course, is not going to be easy to solve, and of course responsibility lies on a specific country. Then we have the question of the water. Water is very scarce. You know that on average in the Sahel, people use 5% of the yearly consumption of water in Europe. That is also something that we have to consider. And last but not least, the region is one of the highest fertility rate that is putting at risk any possible demographic dividend for the future by creating, I would say, a big mass of youth population that is not happy with the future. Coming to the youth and to democracy, a recent Afrobarometer results show that young people still believe in democracy in principle, but they are losing faith in how this democracy is implemented, and this is, I think, is something that is very important, because in particular with the jihadist influence, what is changing is the thinking of the society. And I think that in spite of the fact that we have people that would like to come to Europe because see Europe as a possible model and a kind of economic heaven, what is changing is dramatically how the state could function on the spot. So on our side, I think that we managed already to take into consideration all the suggestions that are coming from this House, in the sense that we have to act on the short term, and this is definitely something that has to address the defense and security challenges, because otherwise, without a minimal security, it's impossible to undertake any possible development operation. The second, but also because this is served to in a way recreate and reestablish confidence in the population on the state function. The second is to work on the local communities, because I think that this is very important in order to prevent the spread of the violent extremism. And last but not least, to support the state in its primary function and the economic development by creating economic opportunity for the local population. I will stop here because there were no questions specifically addressed to the European Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this debate. A debate that was a lively, very lively debate with very differing viewpoints, a very rich debate, a debate where everybody could express their viewpoint in an open, clear and transparent way, respecting the views of others, respecting differing views, complementing each other's views. I would like to say that listening to this debate, I have difficulty actually in understanding how we can do something together, but hopefully next time, because this assembly will continue its work, it will continue its work not only here in Strasbourg with its work on the post-Cotonou arrangements in the 4 different areas, but I am sure we will manage to move on from the differing starting points we have to build on our freedom of opinion to find what unites us rather than what divides us. Thank you very much for this debate. I want to say the Bureau meeting will be starting at 1:45. We've concluded this meeting a little late, and the plenary session will start again at 2:30. Thank you very much.